Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Tony, we get to do the second half of our first set of previews, for the Big Ten championship game. Did a show on Sunday with Kurt, reviewing what we learned from Curt Cignetti on the Sunday press conference, and then ended up talking so long about that I was like, well, let's do a whole separate thing with what we heard from Ryan Day. And it was so interesting. I don't think there was a single question about Purdue on the Curt Cignetti press conference. And there were a whole bunch of questions about Michigan on the Ohio State. And Purdue obviously was a day earlier. I don't think that was the reason why there was only, there were no questions about that game. But I did think that was an interesting juxtaposition. And then that sort of makes you wonder, okay, Indiana very clearly was able to turn the page immediately after that game and had a head start of a day on Ohio State. And then Ohio State's plane got delayed and they didn't get home until late on Saturday night. So you wonder if Indiana is starting this week with a little bit of a head start.
Yeah, I think coaches think that way. That's why Ohio State never wants to play a night game before Michigan. And now they've effectively played a night game before the Big Ten championship game because they were stuck on an airplane. But Ryan Day did admit that it's not a bad place to be stuck. If you're going to be stuck on an airplane or at the airport, do it after beating Michigan and you just get to hang out with everybody. And I did like that he said, and basically pretty much everybody went to bed after that because they got home, late, and it kept them from going out running around. And he's like, not that we have guys that go out and run around, but after beating Michigan, you just never know. Saying that laughingly, like, at least you avoided all of that. And boy, looking at this, it looked like he had not gotten much sleep since getting home. And I tried to ask him about that, but he went in a different direction in terms of like, when did your Sunday begin? Because I don't know that it may have begun on the plane, which he did say they were already breaking some things down on the plane, but it looked like a man who had not slept much. And I'm not sure he will sleep much until next Sunday.
Yeah, I don't know if he has a pull-out sofa or something in his office, but this may be a live at the office or as close as he comes to living at the office kind of week, because they have a challenge ahead, and I'm sure they have had their QA, their GAs and their QC guys sort of breaking down Indiana stuff quite a bit just over the course of the year in preparation. You had a feeling they were going to play Indiana at some point during the course of the year. So this is something that they probably have gotten a good bit of a head start on breaking down some of that film. But yeah, this is going to be a little bit of a compressed week for them. But the fact that it's a Saturday night game, you kind of get a little bit of that time back. Mm-hmm. And then of course, they hate sitting in the hotel all day Saturday, so they'll have to, they'll have to watch more film at that point just to keep themselves occupied, I guess. I don't know.
One of the first questions that he was asked was, I think, a fair one. How do you balance the emotion? How do you come back from, how do you resettle and regroup after a win that on the field felt like a national championship, where everybody's just so happy, or a Big Ten championship where you've accomplished this thing. It's like, that's great, but we also need to go accomplish something else next week as well. And then after that, but he mentioned that going through the playoffs last year, it's great to win a playoff game. He didn't say this, but the worst thing about winning a playoff game, there's another one. And some will say that's the best thing, that's the worst thing. It's like, it just keeps coming until they're finally done and you can breathe and relax. So yes, we saw them last year up on every stage celebrating. Boy, they're having the time of their lives. And then 10 days later, they're locked in. And so I get that it's a concern for us on the outside. These guys have been so locked in all season long that I would be surprised if emotionally they're not ready for this game.
Yeah, this is a team that it's not necessarily the guys that played in those games last season, or at least the guys that started in those games last season. But most of the guys, virtually all the guys on this roster, saw what it took to run that gauntlet last year. Julian Sayin wasn't the one taking the snaps, but Julian Sayin was sitting in the quarterback room and probably watching all the film that Will Howard was watching, and seeing what it actually takes to get through that, and that you can't spend the next 2 nights after you beat Tennessee going out and living it up. You've got to turn the page and get ready for Oregon, and then when you beat Oregon, you got to turn the page and get ready for Texas. And right now, they have to handle their business against Indiana this week. They've got to turn the page from the Michigan game. You won. Ryan Day will his standard line is, we're going to enjoy this one tonight, and then we're going to and they got to enjoy it on an airplane, and that was it. And then it's on to the next one, and now they're on to the next one. The experience that they had last year, I think, is going to be immensely beneficial for them moving forward. Having seen what it takes, knowing what that grind is like, because a team like Oregon, for example, they were the number 1 team in the nation this time last year. They won the Big Ten championship game, and then they lost their first playoff game, and then they were out. And that was basically just a normal season. That was you win the Big Ten in 2015, and you don't make the playoff, but you go and you win one. You go to the Rose Bowl and you win or you lose, and that's it, and your season's over. And so they didn't really have to do that grind the way that Ohio State did, and Indiana didn't have to do that grind last year. So it'll be interesting to see what this how much that benefits them. But you would think, having done it once and having lived it and seen the rewards of doing it the right way, would potentially pay off for them this year.
Ryan Day talks so much about routine and the impact of learning and going through things and experiencing it so that you can fall back on it. Having so many of these players that have experienced the playoffs and the win or go home type of thing, it can only be beneficial. Also beneficial, Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith. He was asked how they have recovered, and Day said they came out as good as could be expected. So that was great, he said, and they will be excited to play in this one for sure. So, Tom, our long national nightmare is over. We no longer have to ask any update on Carnell Tate or Jeremiah Smith, and Ryan Day doesn't have to talk about it. He can just say, look, I already said we're excited for them to play. They'll be excited to play in this one on Sunday, so maybe we can just allow them to be healthy again and good enough to go.
And I think that they were very fortunate the way the game played out, where I didn't go back and watch when we did the show, rewatching the game. I didn't really pay attention to how much Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith were out there. For example, in the drive where they ran nearly 12 minutes off the clock, but I don't think it was much. I feel like you didn't see a ton of them, at least in the last quarter of the game. So, to have a win over Michigan on the road in a way that you didn't have to have those guys catching a bunch of balls. Like, I think the last target for Jeremiah might have been maybe right after halftime. Maybe it just, you didn't see much of them, I don't think. And I haven't seen like official snap counts, but I would bet they didn't play more than a half or 2/3 of the snaps in the games. That helps, because then they're safely off on the sideline and you don't need to worry about someone aggravating something, whatever. Like, they were in decent shape last time you saw them on the field. They should presumably be in just as good or better shape next weekend. And, as Ryan Day said on the, in the post-game press conference, if that was an indoor game, that would have been a very different game. They're playing indoors this weekend. I think the game plan might be a little different this weekend.
And I think it was interesting after the game, and sure, players are probably feeling no pain after the game. Jeremiah Smith is running, jogging up and down, slapping fives with all of the fans. There's certainly no limp like he had 2 weeks ago. Never saw any limps in this game from him or Carnell Tate throughout, and I was watching for that. So if you didn't know that they were questionable going into that game, you would have never known they were questionable. They all seemed fine. And yeah, we saw a lot of David Adolph again to help get those guys some rest as well on some of the running plays, essentially. And then speaking of the running plays, Tom, and also the offensive line, Ryan Day said this past game was as good as he's seen from his offensive line. 43 knockdowns, as he said, which I've never heard of before. if you're going to do something you've never heard of before in a good way, save it for the Michigan game. And they were physical, and you can just dial up a random play. There was one where couldn't tell if it was Bennett Christian or Will Kazmarek, but they put TJ Guy down on the ground on a running play. You never get a great look at his number, but Luke Montgomery is pulling on one, and I don't know if it's a linebacker that fills the hole or whatever, and he went immediately down to the ground. So there's all kinds of plays. Maybe that's a good super cut for somebody to put together, is all 43 knockdowns in this one, because there were a bunch. And then as he's talking about his offensive line and how good they do, his last words were, "We got to reload the clip now."
Yeah, I'm sure that getting to 43 knockdowns involves finishing the play and playing to the echo of the whistle more than you probably do against Grambling or Ohio or an opponent like that. But yeah, the offensive line was conspicuous in their inconspicuousness, where you just, other than kind of going, well, boy, the running backs are really running through some decent sized holes, and boy, Julian Sayin sure seems like he has a decent amount of time in the pocket. You really didn't notice the offensive line, and you've been noticing the offensive line in bad ways a lot this year. So yeah, that was clearly one of the areas where they won that game. For them to have 43 knockdowns and the defense to play a total of 44 snaps, those are two winning numbers for Ohio State, and they certainly were on Saturday. And the fact that they only played 44 snaps on Saturday on defense, that's only going to help keep the defense fresh, because they had the starters out there all the way to the end of the game. And it was kind of, at the time, it was like, why are you, putting these guys in peril, relatively, they weren't out there very much. It was kind of for 3 plays or 4 plays here and there. But, boy, why are those guys still out there when everyone knows the game's over? And it was like, well, they need to get their work in. This is the pitcher who hasn't thrown in a while. It's like, well, he's just going to have to throw a couple innings. He's got to get some work in. That was kind of the Ohio State defense, where they hadn't played long enough and enough snaps that they had really, you were getting to the point of fatigue. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons to feel pretty good about where Ohio State is right now going into this week. You wonder how physical a week of practice this is, because you're at the point of the year where you don't want to have anyone get hurt in practice. That might be an interesting thing to ask Brian about at some point this week. Just how physical is practice this week? Because Indiana is going to be doing some hitting this weekend, because this is a game that Indiana is going to be coming 1,000 miles an hour. So you need to be ready for that, but also you got to balance that with not wanting someone to get banged up in practice.
Yeah, and there will be recovery time after this game, but you've got to get to the game first. And it is an important game for Ohio State. This is something that he was asked about, where the question was basically, Ryan, ever since you got here and even before then, it always felt like Ohio State, it was just a foregone conclusion Ohio State was going to be going to the Big Ten championship. And that was just like, it was the 13th game on the schedule. And he's like, it may have felt like that, may have felt like a given to the fans or the media, but it never felt like a given to him. And it's harder than ever to win this conference. And so it is important, if you have an opportunity to win it. It's a great environment, great crowd, has meaning. And then when he was asked about balancing health and being rested for the playoffs versus wanting to win the game, he thinks it's important to win the game, to get that 1 seed going into the playoffs. It means something. He thinks it should mean something. But then he's also like, but there's also, if you start changing and expanding the playoffs, would it be better if 3 through 6 play instead of, or along with 1 and 2? To me, it sounds like if the playoffs are going to expand, he's with me. There's no reason to play these games. No reason to play the conference championship games, because conference championships have been determined long before there are conference championship games, and it starts to become as much of a punishment as it does a reward, because eventually you're going to be like, well, so the reward is what? It's what? A trophy, but like it could still be detrimental. And well, I'd rather it not be detrimental. So there is really, it does not outweigh the negativity that could come from it.
Right. You're putting guys in physical peril every time you go out on the field. So that's something. And you're also putting a bunch of stuff on film every time you go out on the field. And I think the biggest thing, though, is that you don't want, and the folks in charge of the sport pretty clearly do not want teams to go into these games thinking if we lose, we could drop in the rankings. So therefore we would be better off not playing these games at all. And last year, they came in very clearly with the mindset that these teams, if you lost one of these games, you were not going to be, knocked way down the rankings for losing. And Day was asked, should these teams, win or lose, should both Indiana and Ohio State get a bye in the playoff? He, sort of started saying he had no idea, didn't know the other teams involved. And then, but then the answer kind of turns a corner and it's like, here it comes, here we go. But you're not supposed to be penalized for losing this game. So both teams probably deserve a bye. So it's like, well, so you do know then what you think about this. You just kind of had to, hem and haw and, well, I'm not in charge, but also this is what the people in charge say. So clearly this is what, that would be my expectation. Outside of even if someone gets 59-0 on Saturday, which I certainly don't think is going to happen, but even in that kind of circumstance, I don't know how much you're dropping because these teams both have good resumes at this point. So are you going to drop them? If outside of like a real edge case like that, if this is a 10-point game or something like that, I think 1 and 3 are going to come from the Big Ten, and 2 and 4 are going to come from the SEC. And hey, look at that! You don't have a rematch set up in the semifinals, so you can get some all new exciting matchups to watch and for people in different part of the countries to argue about.
One of the interesting things that Curt Cignetti said in his teleconference, he was asked about Ryan Day. He said, Ryan Day is a great coach. He'll be one of the legends of the game someday. And then Ryan Day was made aware of those comments saying that, and it kind of catches him off guard. And it's very complimentary. Appreciate the comment. But he's like, I don't know what to think about it. I've got a lot of football to coach yet. I still got a lot of football ahead of me, and it's interesting to get other coaches' perspective on what Ryan Day is doing at Ohio State. We know what some people up north think of Ryan Day and his ascension. However, but interesting to see Curt Cignetti, who has had to come from the FCS ranks and work his way up and bet on himself, essentially, and he thinks very highly of Ryan Day. And, of course, Ryan Day, same way, thinks very highly of Curt Cignetti, part of a coaching family. You can see, he even mentioned it. He's like, well, there's a reason, people laugh about Googling him, but he said, it's true. If it's out there. You can see all of the history and the winning that's been out there. And I just think these are two teams that are going to be that respect each other, and they know that these are the best teams they've faced all year. It's going to be the best challenge. It's going to be the best test. And the loser, what do you lose? You gain more from what you learn than what the loss will take away from you, basically. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you lose, the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you probably 5 seed, which is actually a pretty good spot. And if you win, you're the 1 seed. And if you lose, you're probably still in the top 4. But even if you drop to 5, that's kind of where everybody would like to be in the playoffs, be that 5 seed. But just overall, Ryan Day, very respectful of Indiana, knows that they can. I think you have to be respectful when you talked about the way that Indiana runs the game, because if you don't take that seriously, like, Indiana will run through you, run around you, and never let you touch the ball. So if you come into this game thinking, I'm sure we'll be fine. This is a much different offense, much different team. Last year, I think Indiana was limited by Curtis Rourke, and I've said it before, I don't think they're limited by their quarterback play. And they sure don't seem to be limited by their offensive line or their running game. So where exactly are the limitations?
Yeah, I don't know that there is a real obvious red flag on this year's team. Just watching them, you can just kind of check the boxes. Like, the offensive line is pretty good. The quarterback obviously is in the Heisman conversation. They got a couple pretty good running backs. They got a couple good. They got wide receivers that I look and I go, oh, that's their Brandon Inniss. Got it. But but their Brandon Inniss who has a much higher usage rate than Brandon Inniss, but and then they've got their guy who they're going to throw down the field to, and they've got a defensive line that's pretty good and deep and impactful, and they got a couple real good linebackers, and they going to pretty good corners, and it's like, all right, you kind of go around the field and you're checking their boxes, and in the Michigan game, going into the Michigan game, we spent all last week telling you, like, look, the middle of the Michigan defensive line is just not that good, and Michigan's cornerbacks are just not that good. And you saw that on the field on Saturday. You're not going to hear us say that this week. I mean, there's spots where it's like, this is what I would expect Ohio State to attack first. Mm-hmm. There's stuff that we can, and don't worry, friends, we'll have some podcasts this week to talk about that. But this is not a team where it's like, oh man, I look at this offensive lineman and I'm like, he is going to have a bad time. Like, you're not seeing that really on this team. And the running back talent is there. They run hard. They're talented. They hang onto the football for the most part. They've got good wide receivers. This is not the 2001 Miami Hurricanes in terms of talent, but it's a really good, well-rounded team where they are going to make you earn every single thing that you get. And so this is a mindset game to a certain degree for Ohio State, that it's probably helpful that they have seen Indiana for 2 years now, and that this is no longer, Tom Allen had the 1 year in 2020 where it was sort of like, well, yeah, boy, Indiana's one of the best teams in the country, but and when they come to Columbus and they lose, and and then it was like, well, if Ohio State has enough other teams back out on them, then Indiana can get into the Big Ten championship game. And I'm sure that's going to be a conversation this week. Can't wait to relitigate that one this week, Tony. But that was 1 year, and then you look at the year before that and the year after that, and it's like, okay, that was 6-2 for Indiana, 6-1 in the Big Ten. They lost to Ohio State, and then they lost the Outback Bowl that year. But the year before that, they were 5-4. The year after that, they were 0-9. Indiana has followed up last year's 8-1 conference record with a 9-0 season instead of an 0-9 conference season. So about as different as you could be, I would say.
And yet they, at least they didn't make the same changes that Cam Cameron did with the helmets back when he was at Indiana in the late 90s.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. No thanks. Love to see the Hoosiers, what they're doing now, staying true to themselves, but also, as Ryan Day said, Curt Cignetti has adopted modern football with the ability to change the rosters essentially overnight and evaluate talent and develop it. So there you go. Some thoughts on what Ryan Day had to say. We will be talking to players on Monday and probably Wednesday, talking to Ryan Day on Tuesday. So again, subscribe to the channel if you've not yet done so. Subscribe to the podcast if you've not yet done so. And just stay locked in with us. We'll keep you covered. We'll let you know everything's going on. There's going to be a lot going on. It's a big, big game, 1 versus 2. It does not happen every year. Sometimes it does not happen at all until you're not even guaranteed a 1 versus 2 anymore. And yet you're getting one this coming weekend. So looking forward to bringing that to you on Saturday. And then every day between now and then, we will have something for you as well. Plenty for you, in fact. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you all later.